Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I have a really simple Christmas card to share with you that anyone can do, and you might not have this specific stamp set. It's the Holiday Flurries from Hello Bluebird, but you might have another snowflake kind of stamp set and you can perfectly use that one. Or you might have snowflake dies and then you can perfectly use those. So yeah, I hope to inspire you today. There are many ways to create this card. You can also do ink blending, but since I do that all the time, I thought, why don't I do a tiny bit of the most simple watercoloring possible? As you can see, I have a paintbrush. It's kind of a wide one. This one is 8. I don't have a bigger one. Otherwise, I would take a bigger one because it took me a bit of time. And then I took some distress inks. The distress inks that I'm using today are Black Soot, Aged Mahogany, and Festive Berries. And I'm going to create this painted background that is going to be a gradient from really soft pink towards blackish red. That's what I'm doing here. The paper that I'm using is Stratmore Bristol Smooth. If you have other watercolor paper, that's perfect. This paper is made for some watercoloring, but it cannot handle a ton of water either. So that's why I didn't add any water ahead of time on this paper. I'm just adding these back and forth stripes, sort of painting. I'm not a painter, but sort of painting it, and then in between I will heat set it to let the paper dry a bit quicker because I don't have the patience. And then I will add more and more and more layers to darken up the background that I am creating. This also is a complete piece of paper of Stratmore Bristol Smooth. You can already die cut if you want to, but don't forget that it can curl up and it can be really handy to just to add it flat on top of a cardboard or on top of your mat or anything like that. I have this big paper. I will later on use the dies that I want to use to create my background. Also the inks, if you have watercolor inks, definitely use those. I don't really, I have one palette I think, but it wasn't with the colors that I wanted to use for this card. So I went with my distress inks because maybe you know, maybe you don't. But distress inks are just perfect. They're wonderful and I love using them for watercoloring. Whenever I'm watercoloring, which hasn't been a lot this year, I know, but whenever I do that, I just smudge the ink as I did now on my acrylic block or on my medium mat there, and then I add a bit of water and drag it towards the paper. And that's just how I roll because I don't have really fancy watercolor inks. Okay, so anyone can do this. If you have refills, I don't have a lot, but I do have the Black Soot because that one is running out all the time, so I needed the refill. If you have refills, you can also just use a drop of the refill and then add a bit of water to soften it if needed. As you can see here for the Black Soot, I decided to use my refill immediately because I just knew that my tiny ink cube wasn't that full anymore. Also, you can easily blend different distress inks together like you would do with watercolor paints to get that color that you want. And then I'm just working my way towards the bottom. Really fun. But again, if you want to use tons of water, use another paper because this one, well, it really was at its end when I finally finished with my gradient. But in case you prefer, this background can easily be ink blended as well. So ink blending is something that you can do if watercoloring, well, this isn't really hard, but if watercoloring isn't your thing, then ink blending is perfect as well. I just thought that it was a nice thing to show it this way as well, but I think I will recreate this card kind of by doing ink blending also with other combinations, not only this reddish, pinkish, blackish combination, and tin can really. In case, for example, that you really love distress oxide inks, I would suggest, if you want to have few like really unique combinations to look at Christina Werner, because she has done some fabulous ink blends, mostly with oxides, if I'm not mistaken. You can do them with distress inks, but don't forget that distress inks can be a tiny bit harder to get the blend right, while oxides give you some wiggle room. They are a bit juicier to get you going with some blends. It depends on how crazy you want to go, actually. But definitely check that out if you are interested in just ink blending and if oxides are your preferred inks. So as you can see here, I really wanted that upper part of my card later on to be really black, and so I went with that refill from my distress ink straight on top of the card. Well, on my cardstock or on the Stratmore Bristol Smooth to blend that out. I also tried this. Well, I don't think it's the best thing to do with your cubes, but I was wondering whether just rubbing the cube over the paper and then adding a bit of water to like soften it, or just to create that well, watercolored look, that it was gonna help. Sort of did, but it also sort of didn't. Uh, so I don't think I will do that again. If that can be a good recap of to do or not to do, in my opinion, just don't know. But you can. Um, but it was kind of hard for me to get a really rich red on there with ink blending. I think I would have achieved that way quicker. But I also really love how this kind of watercolored vibe looks. So therefore, I really wanted to try that this year again. I think last year I did it once, like I'm not sure actually, but I think I did. Also, there is like this card inspiration by Christina Werner with kind of a drip. That is also, well, you sort of start, or you sort of do the same thing, but you can also already rip your paper on the bottom. You have like this ripped edge, which is really fun, of course. Once the paper was dry, I took my dies to cut a panel out of it, and I took the nesting Deckle A2 die from Hello Bluebird. I really love these nesting Deckles, like the mini slimline. This one, I just would use it all the time if I could. So many ways to add this Merry Christmas. I'm going to white heat emboss all of the things that I'm going to add right now. So you can add it all over if you want to. Also, I created this bigger watercolored piece just because this way I could really choose which part I love the most to have my card made from. And so I went for the right side, because left, you can see there are some, well, it's not that regular. So here I took my stamp set, the Holiday Flurries, and I had to decide how my white heat embossing was gonna work out. Originally, I wanted to add it complete. Well, I wanted to fit it completely, but then I was like, well, I also really love how my background looks, so maybe I can just be more subtle, more subtle, and just let everything shine as well. You know, all of the colors, and not trying to cover it all. So here I am extremely adding, well, I'm adding a ton. It's a bit extreme, yes. I'm adding a ton of anti-static powder to help me with this embossing. I am not good in heat embossing. Most of the time I don't prep enough, and or I shift paper. Those things happen all the time to me. So I don't do it often. I have tried to do it more lately, but for this card, really the embossing had to be spot on, because you would see it all if it was ruined. So I went with my Versamark all over, and then I'm just using this tool to help me get a good press everywhere. And I really love what I saw here, but just to make sure, I'm adding a second layer of this Versamark on top. Maybe I just didn't stamp something out right, so this way Wonderful. I'm using my white embossing powder as always. It's the white from Ranger. It's the super fine detail, which is really handy if you have these delicate snowflakes like the ones from the holiday flurries here. And then I'm just trying to remove all of the excess embossing powder. From time to time it can be in a really small area. Then I just take a really small tool to help me. Sometimes I can get rid of everything using a paintbrush. Sometimes it's in a really tiny area that I need to use like a craft knife just to get rid of that one embossing powder element. It just depends. And then I made sure to heat set it completely, taking my time to really see that everything was melted. And once I was sure of that, I could again lay my dye on top and die cut my specific panel out. You see here, by just removing that anti-static powder, that all of a sudden that background pops again. I really love that. So I went over it kind of, well, a lot, using this paper towel. And then I could place my nesting Deckle A2 size die. This is the biggest one, using some purple tape to keep it in place. And then I will run it through my die cutting machine and we will have our panel. Again, if you want to, you can fill this up completely. I also contemplating leaving it like this, but then I decided to take my white gouache and just splatter all over this panel using a paintbrush here. I don't know about you. Would you leave it as is? Would you add more snowflakes? Would you love to cover it completely? Or would you do like I did, just keep it minimalized, but then in the end turn to the white gouache to add tons of white tiny splatters all over? Many ways to recreate this card. Just choose some elements, leave the others, or add more if you want to. Also, if you don't like watercoloring and maybe ink blending, a complete panel like this isn't your thing either, maybe you have some gorgeous pattern papers. I think that I have some beautiful pattern papers that I could easily use. Quick cards, the pattern paper is doing the work in the background, then you add your sentiments, your white heat embossing or your die cuts, and then just add it to a card base. That would be lovely as well. I also have like snowflake dies from Hello Bluebird, and I contemplated about using it or combining the two of them. I didn't do it in the end, but I think it can be easily used on a card like this. So that is it for today. Really simple, depending on how you want to create your background. It can go quicker or take a bit more time, but I really love how this bright red ended up and how these gorgeous snowflakes just jump from the background. I hope that I could inspire you today. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll be back soon with some new card inspirations. Bye!